Okay, so the day-to-day of Camp Hero, well, what it was like, it varied depending on your level of rank and your assignment, and at what stage of quote-unquote training you were at, or if you had graduated from it. So I'll just go through that bit by bit. For new arrivals and for those in training, at least for those in training and new arrivals who were not of the privileged class, it would involve being in the cage, sometimes for days at a time, sometimes weeks at a time, being fed irregular meals of dog food that they would just throw in a bowl and you would scramble for it and try and eat what you could. Many people starved. And then what happened next was eventually you would be called out and taken to where you had an assignment. And while you had an assignment, you would be usually, at least for a while people were gearing up and everything, you would be in an office. And during that period, you could do all sorts of things to survive. You could slip away and pass a note to a friend. You could go and see someone. You could barter for some real food. Usually, I think I made a note on the black market earlier, but it was high-calorie, non-perishables. Things like beef jerky, candies, condensed milk, graham crackers, canned vegetables, canned fruits, anything like that that people could get a hold of. But eventually your assignment would begin, and the assignments varied both in how long they took and in what they entailed. Most of them were ops, and it would entail leaving the base on a mission. So you would be geared up if you needed to be age advanced or age regressed or anything like that. They would do that. Then you would gear up and go off on your operation. And however long the operation took, whether it was a few minutes to a few decades, you would come back and only a few seconds would have passed on the base. Let's see, what else? There were some assignments on base in the offices which could entail any number of things, really. It could be fetching coffee. You might end up with the remote viewing department. You might end up doing in the clerical department. You might end up poring over history books, looking for changes that had happened, all the things you might expect of a time travel program. And then at the end of your operation, you would be put back in the cage. Eventually, when you had quote-unquote graduated from your quote-unquote training, you would be given some sort of a rank. I still don't remember what Alex's rank was, and you would be given some better housing. You would be given a bunk bed in a barrack, as opposed to being in the cages. And I still remember Alex's was bunk 412, and he was in I believe the barracks for the Navy people. And let's see what else. There were all sorts of other duties you might do on base. About the trying to survive aspect, I mentioned there was a black market. There was no surefire way to get onto it. You had to pray eventually that someone would notice you and decide that they wanted to help you, which for most people that did eventually happen. And usually it was people who were from the Marine Corps who were the heads of this black market who would smuggle things in, or who brought things in and would hand it over. And you had to go through all sorts of chicanery to smuggle this stuff around, under your clothes, between your legs, whatever you could manage, really, to get it into the room with the other kids and eat it and share it if you could. And the people in charge knew this all was happening, but they kind of wanted it to happen because they wanted you to make yourself survive, or how would I put that better? It was kind of a rite of passage, I guess, showing that you were willing to break the rules and that you would do anything to stay alive, because that was at the end of the day what they wanted. Let's see. And like I mentioned, you eventually got into the barracks, and when you were in the barracks, things improved a lot. There were still beatings and horrid things like that, but there was food. And you were paid some nominal amount of money, because I can remember at one point going into town and buying some clothes, would you believe? And you would try to assist when you got into the barracks. Some people were completely selfish. I tried to assist on the black market when I could. And a lot of that food also came from the offices, I should add, which was why it was such a prestigious thing, or such an envied thing, to be able to get work in an office, because there was a canteen and they would dish out food. So to everyone, it didn't matter who, if you were adult or child or whatever. So the upper class, they lived a whole other life. I'll get to that in the next thing. The upper class lived absolutely wild, lavish lifestyles. They would have the most extravagant imaginable parties at the Montauk Manor or in their barracks or wherever else. They had their food portaled in from New York or Paris or Tokyo or, you know, the great food cities. And I would actually have to go and fetch that sometimes for Preston. I would go fetch him his sandwiches from his favorite sandwich shop in Zurich, and sometimes I would actually pick his pocket or pick someone else's pocket so that I could buy myself something, or I would steal food. I mean, you know, you do what you have to do to stay alive. But the upper classes, they had extravagant parties. They would go on trips in time and in space for fun. They would go on these insane vacations to meet their favorite historical characters or just to go see amazing scenery. They would have public orgies on a pretty regular basis, and, you know, they would throw in a few kids for that. They were really sick people, like just the really sick people. But so that was what it was like for the upper classes. And the political structure. The political structure was always of the times, interestingly. Even though there was kind of a sense of timelessness, because it was in a time bubble, and, you know, people's ages were changed all the time. They were changed to whatever was needed in the moment. When you paid attention to the political environment, you always knew what era you were in. You know, you would never step into, if you were to wake up tomorrow, you would never wake up tomorrow and find yourself at Montauk in the 90s. You would not for a moment think you were at Montauk in the 60s. You would know, if you paid attention to the political scene, that it was of the times. I know that they had some say in who became president of the U.S. and who became rulers of various countries. I know that they very heavily backed, interestingly, the Ho Chi Minh. I know that they heavily backed Ho Chi Minh, and that's a big part of why the North won the Vietnam War. And Chiang Kai-shek was kind of a revered figure at Montauk, but among a lot of people. And he made visits there multiple times. And so in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it was very much a Cold War environment. You were spying on and countering the Eastern Bloc a lot of the time. After the end of the Cold War, it became very off-planet oriented, more so than anything, until the War on Terror, and then it transitioned over to spying on the Middle East and doing operations in the Middle East. So it was always of the times. It was just in a kind of Star Trekian environment almost. Not Star Trek like, Stargate SG-1 like, let's say. Spying on and carrying out operations in time against whoever were the enemies of the U.S. in the moment. I could mention there was the period of détente between the end of the Cold War and Putin's rise to power, when the U.S. and Russia were pretty close, and U.S. and China were pretty close in that period. There were a lot of Russian and Chinese assets who came over on personnel exchanges, and there were a lot of American Montauk people who went over to China or Russia to be in their time travel or other SSPs. And when the relations soured again, those assets were kept on both sides. They did not return our people, we did not return their people. So those people who left Montauk during the period of détente are still in China or Russia or in one of their colonies, and the Russian and Chinese assets who came to Montauk during the détente period are still with Project Phoenix, or maybe they've transferred out, but they're still with an American program of some description. So that's what I can say about that. Ask questions, please.
Can you talk about your personal experience in the Montauk day-to-day, about the training and the graduation, and also about the silent coup story?
Okay, my experience in the day-to-day, during the quote-unquote training phase, because again, there was very little formal training, really. It was being thrown in, seeing if you could survive, and then they decided you had done that long enough, kind of thing. But, I remember sometimes being brought out of the cages and then kind of just turned loose on the compound. I don't know quite how or why that came to be, but that would happen, and I remember myself and my trauma twin and another boy, two other boys. One of them was this Stan Mulgrave, who I've mentioned. The other one, I'm not going to say his name, but I remember us constantly running around dodging work details or dodging people coming in and combing the facility looking for slave labor from other factions and such. And we would hide out in a crawl space under the Marine Corps barracks. How we came to be in the Historische Abteilung was that was one of the work details that I wound up on once, was to work in that office. And Herr Monowitz took a shine to me, and he bought out my contract so that on behalf of the department, he himself didn't really, but on behalf of the department, he bought out my contract and my trauma twins contract so that we would go to work there permanently after our graduation. And I may as well get to the graduation. We were age advanced to adult bodies for that ceremony, and it happened in the concert hall. There was a lot of pomp and circumstance around it, which is hilarious and kind of gross when you think about it, but I remember they had a blue carpet on the floor, and you would walk up and something was hung around your neck. I don't remember what it was exactly. And there was, they were handed out by this Samantha Lee woman who she'll be quite prominent in the book, actually, because she was in Kyle's story as well. And by the way, she is a clone of this Hong Kong singer Paula Choi, or Paula Choi is a clone of Samantha Lee. I mean, you know, who knows, really. And I remember Janice actually sang during that ceremony. She sang, I used to remember what song it was she sang at that, but I don't remember it anymore. To be honest, I've kind of blocked some of these, again, re-blocked them for myself, some of this period of time. The silent coup, well, I don't remember, I don't know how it exactly happened, because, you know, I was just a slave still. I had not graduated or anything. I was just a slave child. It was in, I believe, 1967, when Herr Monowitz, by rising through the ranks and doing bits of subterfuge, came to control the program. Before him, I don't remember who it was. I believe it may have been an alter of the gentleman we know as Jack Pruitt, but I can't swear to it. So, yeah, he came to power, and under him things very slightly began to improve. He's the one who did implement, finally, language learning classes so that people could understand each other, and he began the process that eventually would come to, decades later, would eventually come to dominate the program, was the outsourcing and transferring of people once they reached a certain age. Before that, people who came there, unless they were there simply for a period of training like Penny, people who were brought there usually stayed until they died, until Herr Monowitz came to power. He did not do anything about the raping or any of that sort of thing, so it was only the very slightest bit of improvement. Yeah, I think that's about all I have to say on that.
Can you say more about the black market, the secret life, the supply runs, and the overall exchange with the outside?
The black market, I just know that it was mostly food and drink coming in from the outside that the officers had, that people would smuggle into the cage rooms or into other areas. We would also, there was kind of a secret life of people trying to eke out a normal existence. We would sneak off to play somewhere, or sometimes people would smuggle in a deck of cards or something that we could play with, you know, things like that. Just trying to make things a little bit normal. Supply runs, That's a euphemism for when we would go and pick up, or, well, when we would go and abduct kids. I do remember participating in them. We would usually go in a black van. Sometimes it was a white van, sometimes it was some other type of vehicle. And we did it in cities around the world, but I specifically remember it in Toronto on Yonge Street and in Cape Town on the Victoria and Alfred waterfront. And it was usually kids who were walking to school, or kids in like tour groups, or homeless kids who we would pick up. Ones where either they would never be missed, or it was easy to get away with, you know. Horrid stuff, but that's how it was, and I can't sugarcoat it. The exchange with the outside, there wasn't that much. The main stuff I remember getting from the outside was things like acting makeup, you know, disguise things, so acting makeup, wigs, clothes from different periods, and also some types of weapons. If they were like swords or things, we actually would forge them on site. We had very skilled blacksmiths and metal workers who could carve swords and knives and axes and things like that, or forge them, I should say, not carve. Forge swords and knives and axes for us. But guns and bullets we did have to get from the outside. I remember the bullets we actually got from the Army, so we had the same guns as the US Army, which in the 60s that would have been, I don't know. I remember when we switched over to the M16 though, in 69 or 70, something like that. And this meeting took place out in the woods somewhere way away from Camp Hero. They would pull up in one of those covered trucks, and the back would just be full of boxes of bullets and guns and gun parts, and we would take them and drive off and go back to Camp Hero. Oh, and there were dealings occasionally with a lumber yard. I think Joseph has mentioned this once or twice on his interviews with Penny. There was a lumber yard where we would get the wood to make our fighting sticks, because that was what we trained with predominantly, was fighting sticks. And if you know anything about martial arts and that sort of thing, you know that fighting sticks break pretty quickly. So we had to get those quite often until finally someone had the sense to get some batons for us to use instead, and those actually lasted. But other than those few things, we were pretty much self-sufficient. We grew our own food. We had food replicators, of course. We had people who could repair anything and everything that might need repairing, who lived on base at all times. So we were pretty well isolated from the outside world.
Who were the upper class?
They were the officers and civilian contractors, and the children of said officers and civilian contractors. Most of the children there were slaves, and so were the rank and file military people, and so were pretty much all of the aliens there, by the way. Although a bit less so, because they couldn't treat them too terribly, because, you know, that would fuck up our diplomatic relations with that species if it was found out. But it was the officers, and there were civilian contractors, like I mentioned, the people who could repair things and things of that nature. Some professors, some CIA personnel those are also considered civilian contractors who lived and worked there. That's basically it. And how they got into this position, we shall never know, probably, because for one thing, most of them are dead by now, but also I wasn't there, and I have yet to meet anyone who was there at the very beginnings of the project.
Can you talk about your relationship with Preston Nichols and Al Bielek?
Preston was the most evil thing, I'm not even going to call him a person, evil thing I've ever had the misfortune to meet, which is saying a lot. Look, I've met Joseph Mengele, and he was not 1/10 as evil as Preston. We did not have a good relationship, although he liked the way I did my work and all of that. But, you know, we didn't get along whatsoever, and it was the cause of my transfer because I caught him with a child I leave it up to your imagination as to what was going on. And it wasn't the first time I'd caught him, and I knew that he was doing that constantly, but for whatever reason that time I just snapped and pulled a gun. My handler unfortunately stopped me from being able to pull the trigger, but it's difficult to talk about, but yeah, that was the cause of my transfer ultimately, because of insubordination. And let's see what else. Oh, Albelik. Albelik was scared of me. From what someone else has told me, it was because there was another timeline that Albelik was apparently familiar with, where I became a fascist dictator and was quite powerful and frightening. That's definitely not at all what I'm like in this timeline. I think you can probably tell that. But in some other timeline, I guess circumstances conspired so that I was. And he was scared of that I had that kind of potential in myself. So he avoided me at all costs. So he's the one I probably can say the least about, actually, of the people we really know about, who were a part of it.
Can you talk about the time bubble and how it worked?
Okay, how exactly the technology worked, I can't tell you. I'm going to just say that up front. What I can tell you is that it went up on, I believe it was April the 3rd of 1971 at dusk. I don't know the exact hour, but it covered all of Camp Hero. It went a good ways out into the water, and it also covered the Montauk Manor and a good portion of the town of Montauk. Now, how this worked was that it was a time bubble. It existed outside of time and outside of space. It could only be accessed via portal. You could not get in or out unless you had a portal. Or at least you couldn't get in. I have heard some people say it was actually possible to get out, but you could not get in without a portal. So if you were to drive up to that spot, you would see it basically as how we see it in linear time. It was a separate space, like a pocket reality, I guess, is the term James has used before. Why they did it was basically so that, for one thing, so they could build more, because inside they did build a lot more and came to cover up quite a lot more land than they had before. The main thing was that the sky never changed. It was weird. A lot of people who came assumed for a while that we were on a tidally locked planet somewhere, but then eventually someone would tell them, no, we're in a time bubble or a time freezing zone, and it just never changes. Yeah, that's about all I really have to say about it.
Can you talk about the Draco that were on the base?
Okay, the Orion Syndicate did not arrive until Preston's period. He's who invited them in. They were not there until he was in charge. There were other reptilians there, but they were not Draco. There was, for example, Ezekiel, the black reptilian. I still don't know the proper name for whatever species he was, but he was actually very good to me and my trauma twin. He was close with us, and I have met other Montauk kids who also remember him, and yes, he was good to us. And there were a couple of other reptilians there who, I think they were predominantly technicians who worked on and repaired the alien tech we had. They didn't interact with me very much. They seemed decent enough, I guess.
This AI of Montauk, do you remember it being in the form of the 60s type servers?
I don't remember it being in 60s type servers. I remember that it inhabited a black cube. It was far underground, far underground. Most people there, most rank and file, had no idea it existed. It was 12 levels underground. Only the first 11 were known to most people, and the 12th level where it was. And it had been laying down there dormant for maybe, I don't know, thousands or maybe even millions of years.
Okay, another question. How could all of these rivaling programs and groups have access to the same assets and their alters?
The kind of neutral party who creates our assets and then sells them, creates our alters, and then sells them off, are the intelligence agencies. Whatever the big intelligence agency of, in the States, that would be the CIA, of course. They're neutral parties for the most part. I mean, they keep some of the alters for themselves, of course. But otherwise, they make them and then sell them off to everyone. That's how people always have altars in every faction, just about. And basically that's how that works. They're just in it for the cash and the power that comes from making these altars and selling them off. They don't really care about politics or anything, which is how even countries that are considered enemies can wind up having assets from the country that is considered an enemy. Like, I'm good friends with an American who has a Russian altar. I've met someone who has a Chinese altar, and so on, you know. So that's how that works, basically.
Did you by any chance see or hear about Howard Hughes being connected to Montauk?
Oh yes, this is a fun story. I remember him at the parties at the Montauk Manor, the ones that Preston threw, that would be catered to by, you know, Michelin 3-star chefs from Lyon and Tokyo, while the children ate dog food, and they would bring in some of these slave children for the purposes that you bring a child to a party full of rich people for. Yeah, I remember Howard Hughes there. He was an enthusiastic participant. Yeah, I remember seeing him there plenty of times. And whether he was conscious in his regular life, I mean, who knows? You know, he's been extracted and is on some planet somewhere, probably Centurion by now. And we can't ask him if he remembers this stuff, and if he did, I'm sure he would be smart enough to deny it. So, you know, it's rough. But yeah, I remember him.
Can you briefly talk about the trauma twinning process and your trauma twin?
Trauma twinning, right. So, Alex was trauma twinned to a woman, or she wasn't a woman, she was a girl of his age at the time, by the name of Melanie Dumont. She was French. She was part of that group of kids brought in, you know, from across the Western Bloc, and they were found to have highly complementary capabilities, which was how they did that. They went through lists of abilities and cross-referenced them with the other kids. It was a really painstaking process, actually, and really time-consuming, but it had to be done to find the best person to trauma twin you with. They would carry out the trauma twinning by subjecting you to torture in front of each other, or by putting you in situations where you would be forced to rescue the other person, you know, VR combat scenarios or even real combat scenarios, things like that, and then torturing you. I remember a lot of it was, of course, sexual, because that was what they were going for, and I'm not going to describe that. And I remember being stretched out over a grill, or being forced to watch as the other person was stretched out over a grill and you were powerless to save them. And during all this, they would be pumping pheromones into the room, and they would be pumping fear hormones into the room, and they would be pumping love hormones into the room. So it was creating a love bond, but it was completely artificial. You know, these people, more often than not, really had nothing in common whatsoever. It was, you know, entirely created. And you emerged from it having been twinned to where you were essentially the perfect duo to do the bidding of the programmers in charge. And also, the added benefit was that you would probably eventually have kids that they could harvest. And so that happened to Melanie and Alex in '69, when Alex was 13, I think she was 11 at the time. I've known of people who had it done when they were 4 or 5, but for whatever reason they didn't do it at that age with Alex and Melanie. And when Alex got sent away, they were separated. When he got sent away to Looking Glass, they were separated, but eventually they sent her to Looking Glass too. And they were together for 10 years after that, before again being separated, along with their son. But that's part of Kyle's story. Well, actually, I'll tell this to segue into Kyle's story a little bit. At Looking Glass, Alex and Melanie had a son. I won't say his name, his real name, but I will say his German name, Julius. And when Julius was 8, the 3 of them were on Europa for some reason, business. Alex was sleeping in a room somewhere because he had a head cold, and when he woke up, Melanie and Julius were gone. I have no idea what happened to Melanie to this day. Julius, however, when he was 8 years old, was sent to Montauk, and that from there he was raised by Kyle for the rest of his life, or for the rest of his childhood, and then as an adult he continued to be with Kyle until 2014, but that's another story.
And finally, let's say how Alex was sent to Project Looking Glass.
Okay, so Alex is being sent away. That was in 75. Or 74. It was either 74 or 75, I'm not sure. I believe it was early 75. But at any rate, I know it was winter because he arrived at Area 51 in the winter. It was when he walked in on Preston whilst Preston was in the company of a child. For whatever reason, Alex snapped. He'd seen that happen many times, of course, and he knew that that was happening, but that time he just snapped and he pulled a gun on Preston. Alex's handler tackled him to the ground before he could do anything, unfortunately. But Alex then refused to apologize. And so because of that, he got sent away as punishment, because the ultimate punishment really is being without your trauma twin, right? So that happened. I still can remember their final night together, up in the tower room of the Montauk Point Lighthouse. They would go up there to get away from it all, and they did on that night. And she played him a song. It's playable now. It's called Home to You by Sigrid. She wrote that, and he played her a song that he had written, Landslide, sung by Stevie Nicks. I wonder if either of them knows that these are stolen songs. Probably they both do, to be honest. But whatever. And anyways, so that was it. It's actually pretty simple how he got sent away. And he woke up in the morning and they dragged him away, kicking and screaming, from Melanie, and put him on a transport, and he got taken to Area 51, and that's where he is to this day, doing actually not terribly dissimilar work, although Area 51 and Project Looking Glass, I would say, is a lot better than Project Phoenix ever was, or than Project Phoenix is, because it's ongoing. I cannot stress that enough, that Project Phoenix is ongoing. It never did end. But anyways, yeah, that's about where that ends. Alex's Montauk story.
Moving on. Friends, they turn away. I keep moving on, but I never find out why. I keep pushing too hard and babe, I keep trying to make it right to another lonely day. Just one night, oh yeah. Well, I'm 25 years old now, so I know it can't be right. And I'm no better, babe, and I can't help you no more than I did when just a girl. But it don't make no difference, babe, no, no. And I know that I could always try. It don't make no difference. For I know that they don't come with age. No, no. I ain't never gonna love you any better, babe. And they're never gonna love you right. So you better dig it now, right now. Oh, but it don't make no difference, babe. And I know that I can always try. But there's a fire inside of every one of us. You better need it now. I get to hold it, yeah. I better use it till the day I die. Don't make no difference, babe. No, no, no. And it never ever will. Hey, I wanna talk about living and loving you. I get to hold it, babe. I gonna need it now. I better use it. Say, oh, don't make no difference, babe. Oh, and I hate to be the one. I said you better live your life and you better love your life. Oh, baby, someday you're gonna have to cry. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Oh, baby.